I got drunk and told his mom he was a wimp. He didn't come home for a week, and then... You know what people say about drunk people? That they tend to speak the truth and only the truth. Well, I think my truth that I spoke has now not only implicated me, but also ruined my every chance at happiness. I didn't know. It was a mistake. I wasn't planning on getting drunk, but sitting there at that table with only family who didn't approve of me, all I could do to keep my mouth shut was drink. And I drank like a fish until I was so drunk and was slurring. Dan noticed that, and when he frowned his disapproval, I ignored him and continued until my mother-in-law decided to address my misbehavior. And then she went on and on about how low her son had settled, and how she had never approved of me, and why seeing me drunk was one of the reasons she never did. Usually I never said anything. I usually kept quiet and accepted her words. I never took them to heart, but then that night, I was beyond drunk enough to face her and tell her face that her precious son was a wimp and was always hiding behind her affluence. I didn't even have a filter that night, and I went on and went until Dan had stood up angrily and just left. He didn't show up at home for a week after that, and I anxiously waited for his return, but when he did return, Dan was nothing like the man I had known and married. The change is so massive and present in our lives, and has now done nothing but ruin everything we have together, and it's all and totally my fault. Things weren't always that way between Dan and I. In fact, Dan had gone against everyone just to marry me. He wasn't the wimp I blurted out to his mom that he was. I was just angry and super pissed at everything that I thought was unfair. Dan's family is quite wealthy. No scratch that they are really wealthy. And although I didn't exactly come from a poor background compared to Dan's family, my family was dirt poor. They had this massive multi-billionaire company that was striving, and Dan and his brother did the work, while his mom and sister just spent money. Dan had always allowed his mom to do whatever she wanted. He had always allowed her have her way with things in his life, including where he lived, when he moved out of their house, and what sort of car he bought. And she even had a say on his choice of dressing, particularly when there was an event they had to attend as a family, and that day had been one of those days. She was controlling, and I guess because Dan had always allowed her way, she thought she could too in his relationship. I met Dan at a work gala when I was filling in for a coworker who was supposed to represent the company I worked for. I pretended not to know who Dan was when I saw him, knowing how refreshing it always was for guys when they saw a lady who wasn't interested in their wealth. I knew Dan very well, and I knew that being an acquaintance of his alone was quite catching. Talk less of being in some sort of relationship with him. So I just made sure he saw me very clearly, and I spoke to him boldly like he was just another worker from a different company attending too. Dan, as I had expected, was intrigued, and he collected my number that day. We started talking, and from there things went on pretty smoothly. We dated for about 4 months before Dan asked me to marry him. I believed that things would always go that way, except his mother, when he introduced us together, had refused to accept me. His siblings, particularly his sister, were no different. They had expected that he married someone who was in their class, or perhaps quite higher, and not someone like me. But Dan was quite stubborn, and had married me against their best wishes. I thought that after marriage they would learn to accept me, but that had never happened. His mother hates me because I apparently made her always obedient son rebel against her. It was suffocating trying to please her because of Dan. Although Dan never asked me to, I tried everything to please her, including giving birth to our 2 kids, thinking if she met her grandkids, she would accept me more. She did tolerate me after I gave birth to them. She loved her grandkids very much and was always spending time with them, which meant she had to tolerate me more than she did in the beginning. But I still wasn't satisfied. I wanted 100% acceptance from her, even though Dan was against it. And I know it's not an excuse to have done what I did afterwards. Dan and I have been married 8 years, with our first child 7 years old and our second and last child 6 years of age. And I had done something really stupid. I didn't have a reason for doing it, but I had done it and I regret it so much. I know you guys will blame me for doing it, but I already blame myself, so please be gentle with your remarks. Actually, it wasn't just calling Dan a wimp that had made him leave that day angrily, or even do everything else he had done afterwards. I cheated on Dan with Oliver, my supposed assistant. It was a mistake at first. I was upset that day. He was only employed by Dan because I insisted on having a male assistant assist me with my business, which I opened up with Dan as the sole investor. I didn't want any female assistants because I was scared she was going to try and seduce Dan. So over the years, I fought against any feminine presence in Dan's life. He had to fire his assistant, actually reassign her to another branch of the company in a different state because of me. And every other worker that worked under him directly had to be male. I didn't want any difference when it came to my own assistant, too. I didn't trust any female figure. So Dan helped me interview a couple of male assistants, and Oliver's credibility and worth stood out the most, so he employed Oliver to be my assistant. Oliver really was invisible to me at first. He was just an assistant. He helped with everything and anything. He was just like my right-hand man, and I trusted him with everything. I didn't think anything of him other than that. But that day, Dan's mom had gotten to me again, and I was upset. Dan wasn't home for me to rant to. He had to travel for a business meeting and would only be back the next day. I had decided to go visit her with her grandkids because it was a Saturday, and the kids loved spending time with their grandmother, who spoiled them silly. And then I decided to stay back instead of leaving as I usually did. She wasn't too happy with it, but kept quiet and focused on entertaining the kids. But then when I decided to let the cook go so I could cook us lunch, she got so angry and asked me to leave her kitchen. She told me she employed her staff because she trusted her enough to give her the best dishes, and she didn't want to be poisoned. I was really upset, but I couldn't take the kids along because they wanted to stay there, so I was left alone at home with no one to pacify me. And somehow my assistant appeared. He wanted to show me the new update on the account, but I didn't care about all that, so I just cried in his arms, and when he kissed me to soothe me, I didn't reject him. I had instead wrapped my arms around his neck and pulled him to me. At that moment, I wasn't thinking about Dan or the kids or even my mother-in-law. I was just so invested in the feelings that surged from being with another man. So I let him do everything he wanted that evening. I let him touch me in ways I've always begged Dan to do. I let him kiss me in the ways that Dan had never done for all our years of being married. I let him do to him the things a sex worker got paid for. I behaved in a total wanton way. After the sex, I asked him to leave me. I didn't know how I felt. I felt really guilty knowing I had just betrayed Dan, and yet I couldn't help but feel like a different side of me had been awakened. But then again, the feeling of guilt overwhelmed me much more, so I promised myself never to let it happen again. I even sent a huge amount of money into Oliver's account as payment for the sex, and also to shut him up from saying anything. Oliver said nothing about it afterwards. He was professional and never tried anything personal with me, but it didn't stop me from wondering how he was able to keep his businesslike face around me, particularly after seeing me naked. I felt awkward around him even though I didn't show it, but if Oliver felt the same way, he never said it. I couldn't fire him because I was scared he was going to expose what was between us. But then again, Oliver made it easy to commit the same sin with him over and over again. The next time my mother-in-law had made her crude comments again, I didn't find comfort in my husband's arms. I had instead done so in Oliver's arms right there in my office, and it continued like that. I tried to shake off guilt that kept masking my heart because I couldn't stop seeing Oliver. It was the more crude comments I got from my mother-in-law, the more I sought after Oliver. He never talked about it afterwards. He was professional afterwards. He never treated me the way she did. He was never too busy and was always available. And I paid him. I paid him each time we slept together. I paid him to shut him up, and also as a way to deal with my guilt. I don't know how I thought that would work, but I just did. Eventually, it became more often than was necessary. It wasn't only when my mother-in-law said cruel things anymore. It became every time. It was like I was addicted to the feelings only Oliver could evoke in me. I was addicted to sleeping with him and the feeling of ecstasy that came during that moment. He touched me in ways Dan never had, and that made me crave his touch like an itch that wouldn't go away. I even rented out an apartment for him, so instead of doing it so often in the office and raising the suspicion of my other workers, we could get our private space. A hotel wasn't an option because of my husband's influence. He would easily find out, so the safest option was to rent out an apartment in Oliver's name. Oliver didn't mind. I think now I know that he enjoyed the luxury way more, and he had only wanted to be with me because of it. But back then, I was blinded by my own greed and selfishness to realize that he was only sleeping with me for the money, and not because he had some sort of feelings for me. Because why else would a grown man sleep with a woman he's not in love with? If he truly had feelings for me like he claimed, he would have encouraged me to leave Dan and not stay with him or endure his mother's constant nitpicking. But I guess I was a fool, too blind to see what was right in front of me. I even stopped sleeping with Dan after a while. I was too invested in what I was doing with Oliver. Not because I didn't want Dan to touch me or sleep with me. I mean, I love him. I didn't even love Oliver. I was just obsessed with the feelings I got when I did sleep with him. But when Oliver and I had sex, I became too sore to let another man touch me. So I was always giving excuses of being too tired from work, and Dan, being an understanding man, would accept my excuse and even pet me to sleep. Whether or not he suspected my affair before that day when I had ruined my life, he never said anything. He continued being the loving husband to me, a caring father to our kids, and a good son to his mother. I was becoming too overwhelmed by guilt of what I was doing with Oliver, so I told my friend Stella about it. I expected her to judge me or give me some advice on how to stop or something, but Stella had done otherwise. I came back from her place feeling like I was right. According to her, the only wrong thing I would do is get caught. So I focused on not getting caught, but that didn't last very long though, because in the end, I had been the one to expose myself thoroughly. I did everything perfectly until that day though. I was the perfect wife and the perfect daughter-in-law to my overbearing husband's mother, and I was the perfect mother to our kids. There was nothing to suspect what was going on between Oliver and I. Even though he worked closely with me and attended almost all functions with me except the ones with family, he never misbehaved or looked at differently. There was really no way to suspect our affair, and I thought life was perfect. I got a way to relieve my stress from my marriage with Oliver, so I was happy in other ways, and I thought it would continue like that. I mean the happiness and not the affair. I knew I would have to let go of Oliver eventually, and the time came sooner than I expected when he almost got us caught. Few months back, my perfect lover wasn't so perfect anymore. He was getting too familiar and confident around me. He spoke out of turn, and he was demanding for sex when it had always been the opposite way round. What I didn't know was that he needed money, which he knew I would definitely give him after sex. So he kept coming, and I was always having a hard time resisting him. But then, as if that wasn't enough a month ago, Oliver had stolen a huge amount of money that couldn't be looked over from the business account, and I found out. I found out that he had been doing so before, but he did in small amounts. But this time he was so brave as to have done it because he knew I wouldn't be able to arrest him for fear of being exposed. I couldn't do so truly, but I gave him the business money and asked him to leave totally. Oliver was shocked that I let him go, and that was only a week before the dinner at my mother-in-law's place. He made empty threats and finally left with the money. And I thought that was all. I was free. I didn't have to worry about how and when I was going to let him go. Although I missed his efficiency both in business and in bed, I knew the time was better than later. So I concentrated on getting back the money he stole from me because I didn't want Dan noticing anything wrong with the business. And I really thought everything was back to normal. My mother-in-law's birthday came up and she said she wanted to have dinner with her family, and of course I was included by default. We couldn't take the kids along because it was dinner and we had a set time for the kids to be in bed, and then they had already spent the day with their grandmother, so they were only resting from it. She chose everything to my annoyance: the restaurant, the dishes to be served, and even the dress code she wanted us all to appear in. And feeling a little bit rebellious, I wore pale green instead of the black she had chosen. I was tired of being pushed around by her. Dan said nothing when he saw my dress. He had even complimented me, saying the dress complemented my skin tone. But my mother-in-law definitely had much to say when she saw me. I remember that she hadn't even bothered to hide her disdain, but one look at her son's face, which is Dan, she kept quiet. And when she said family, I thought she meant her sons and daughter, and me. I didn't know she meant extended family members too, because I kept greeting and saying hi to people I had never met before in my life. They were uncles and aunties and grannies from everywhere, and Dan seemed to recognize them. He even got drawn into conversations about work with them while we ate. I was literally the only stranger around. Despite having been married for years, I felt really awkward, and the only thing that was keeping me company was the champagne glass on the table and its content, which kept getting refilled by the unnoticeable waiter. I knew I was drunk after my fourth glass, but I didn't care. I saw Dan frown his disapproval, but I ignored it and kept drinking. But then his mom saw that opportunity to talk down on me again, and I just lost it. I told her that her favorite son was a wimp and that he was only hiding behind her. I told her that she didn't even know that he wasn't even able to satisfy me sexually and was so clueless, or perhaps was hiding behind facts again, that I cheated on him countless times with my assistant. I kept going and going, shouting at his mom, and I didn't even realize what I was doing until Dan stood up and his chair made very loud noises, and then he left without a word to me. I sobered up instantly after that, watching the whole family watch me in shock, and then I ran. I ran away like a coward, and when I got home, Dan wasn't there. I tried to reach him countless times, but he wasn't picking his calls or returning them. I texted several times too, begging him to give me the chance to explain, but no reply came. After 1 week of anxiously waiting for Dan to show up, he finally did. He didn't even look like one who had been going through heartbreak, or someone whose wife had apparently decided to spill the nonsense she had been doing in front of his family. His face was cold and emotionless. He didn't look like the Dan I have always known. I was so scared, and I went on my knees crying and begging him to forgive me, begging him to hear me out, but Dan said nothing. And then he told me in a very cold voice to leave his house and never return. He told me that he was getting a divorce, and he would make sure he took everything that he had ever given me, including our kids, from me. And then he kicked me out with nothing at all. He didn't even allow me to take anything with me. I begged, banged on the door, and cried until I was thrown out completely by the security guard who used to have a lot of respect for me. My life has become total hell ever since that day. Dan stayed true to his words. Every account, both business and personal, was blocked, and I had no access to any money. I couldn't even rent a proper bed space. My brother, whom I haven't spoken to for years, ever since I got married, because I felt I was far above his level and I didn't want him begging me for money all the time, had been the one who came to my rescue. He was the one who sent me money to travel back home to my parents. My parents, who I haven't also spoken to in years, weren't welcoming either, but they gave me my room back and proceeded to ignore me afterwards. I have no access to my kids. My mother-in-law, who had been looking for ways to get rid of me anyways, made sure of that. Everything is just on standstill for me. I have no friends, no home, and living with my parents keeps growing more awkward. They wouldn't even ask me for anything or for the reasons why I cry every night. I feel so rejected, and I don't know what to do or how to go about anything. Just a few days ago, Dan had sent me the divorce papers with some agreements of relinquishing the rights I have over our kids. I haven't been able to bring myself to sign those documents. I cannot not have access to Dan and the kids anymore. Life without them so far has been hell. I cannot go on like this anymore. That's why I'm here, desperately seeking advice. Please help me. How do I get Dan to forgive me and allow me back into his life? How do I get him to accept me again and let me be his wife and the mother of our kids? Please, guys, what do I do? Update. Hello, Reddits. It's been another month. One even more worse than the last had been. I thought with time, everything would get better. That Dan will be able to look at me better, or perhaps even forgive me as time passes. They say time heals broken hearts and wounds, doesn't it? Guess they were totally wrong. Because the more time passes, the more it seems that the pain worsens, and the more hatred Dan has towards me. He has totally and absolutely cut me off. He hates me, and he's going miles to show exactly that. I remember coming to this app with the intention of getting things off my chest, this burden that seems so heavy. I tried getting it off by sharing my life with so many people here, but all I have gotten from coming here to share my honest feelings has been really devastating. I know I should never say any of the things I said at his mother's birthday dinner. Coming here was a mistake. I knew in my heart that there's nothing I ever do to amend what I did. I just wanted to seek some help. That maybe it would be possible against my better judgment. That maybe someone would get me and help me out. But that had been a great mistake. I know I deserve every mean word you've thrown at me, but it really doesn't make it hurt any less. You have managed to not only put me down in different words, but also made me look like a fool, thinking I could find some solace here, or someone who could relate and perhaps advise me on how to navigate this part, which is absolutely dark and with no visible pathways. I know it isn't right for someone like me with a sin of this magnitude to have a dream, but I do, In those dreams, it starts out with me being happy with Dan and the kids. And it's all beautiful until the dream switches up. It's bad enough that I'm surrounded every day by the reminder that I lost my family because I was stupid, but it follows me right into the dream. My brain is like a broken recorder replaying everything that had happened. It keeps reminding me of that very day I had decided to open my mouth and ruin everything. All the things I said, most of it which I didn't mean. I should never have allowed Dan's mom to rile me up so much to the extent of saying such things. Looking back, she never really did anything bad to me. She only disapproved of me and was honest about it from the beginning. Then when I gave her grandkids, she tolerated me. That should have been enough. I should have settled for that, but instead I wanted everything that I didn't have. And then I went ahead and did something really stupid. Dan never once approved the way his mom treated me. He made sure she knew her place, and whenever he was around, she usually behaved, but I just kept fishing for compliments and love in the wrong places. I had all the love I could have ever wanted, and yet I still wasn't satisfied. I wanted everything, and now I have nothing. My greatest mistake was sleeping with Oliver. Having nothing but time to reflect on my stupid mistakes, I realized that I could have done without Oliver. There was nothing he gave me other than pleasure. He took and took from me and yet gave me nothing, and I wasn't wise enough to see it. I could have easily stopped. I should have. I should have begged Dan for his forgiveness after the first time and fired Oliver instead of keeping him around and continuing the affair. I wish I had known the end from the beginning so I could have avoided all of these mistakes. I would never have allowed Oliver to kiss me that evening. I would have slapped him and fired him on that spot instead of allowing him to touch me even more. I will still be married to the love of my life, and I will still be the mother of my kids, and despite the awkwardness between my mother-in-law and I will still be in her space whether or not she wants me to. I have ended up wasting my whole life. The life I have built for myself for the past 8 years. Now I have nothing. My parents were so uncomfortable with me there, especially after eventually finding out what I did. They kicked me out. I was never a useful daughter to them. I never recognized them. Even though I knew that Dan had always come down with the kids every Christmas to greet their grandparents, I never went with them. I stayed back and went to parties with my friends. I ignored them immediately after marriage, so I didn't have any rights when they threw me out. I couldn't even beg because they housed me for more than I actually thought they would. I was a terrible daughter to them, especially when they needed me the most. It seems I'm not only a terrible daughter, but also a terrible wife and mother. I imagine how my kids would feel without me in the picture. Their grandmother is probably already looking for a replacement for me. They probably will forget me soon. They're still too young to comprehend fully what has happened. They will probably only miss me for a while. Or not if their grandmother has anything to do with it. She probably will keep them too occupied with plenty of things to remember they ever had a mother. I wonder how they will feel about me when they're grown. Will they find out the truth about my affair? Will Dan tell them? Will they hate me so much and then avoid me as I have done to my parents? Will they really never let me be part of their lives forever? All of these questions make my heart ache so badly. I wonder how my kids will eventually feel about their mother, their cheating, lying mother who lied to them and cannot even keep the promise she made years ago to be an ever-present mother. You guys don't know how awful this feeling is. The feeling of missing out on every day of your kid's life, just because you were too stupid to think about the future. How it feels when they call them for awards, and it's only their dad showing up instead of both of us. How it would feel like watching my girls grow from afar. How bad it would be watching them thank their father in their acknowledgement instead of us both. They would hate me because I won't be there celebrating or cheering them on. The last time I had seen Dan was the time we met in court. I knew I was playing a losing game. I had no lawyer or money to hire one. I couldn't even defend myself even if I did have. There was already a lot of incriminating evidence without even going to court at all to testify. I would lose the case before I could ever get into the witness box. I remember the look on Dan's eyes as he stared at me after the court approved of the divorce. I remember the way his mother had scorned me before leaving with her son. I remember Dan walking out of my life, and that was so painful, and I ended up having a panic attack right there outside the courtroom. I'm left with nothing and no one, and knowing that I don't even deserve to be my kid's mother, because of the outrageous things I've done. My heart just feels like it would burst from the pain that is now part of my every waking moment. I know it probably won't change anything, but ever since that day, I keep sending Dan text messages to apologize, even though he reads none of them. I feel like I owe it to him to repent for the rest of my life, especially after how I had destabilized not only the kids' lives, but also our marriage. I'm so ashamed to even show my face around the kids because of how awful I had behaved. Not that Dan would even let me see them. He was totally clear on the fact that he never wanted to see me around them again, or even around him, and there's the fact that I have no right to do so anymore legally. I've ended up chasing away everyone and anyone who could help me, and now I'm stuck between painful memories and loads of regret. It's almost always painful thinking about what my future would be like from now on, thinking about how hard I will continue struggling for, how much it will continue hurting, how long I will continue regretting the family I was supposed to cherish. I think every day about the safe space Dan had managed to build for us without much contribution from me. He gave us a home and never stopped providing for us. Despite being rich, he was kind, patient, and loving. He loved me so much and went against his family's wishes and kept on showing me that love until the end, until I had ruined things between us. He is the sort of man every woman prayed for, but I was just too selfish and greedy, too caught up in my own world to see exactly what it was that I had until I lost it. I miss them so much. It's so painful that I never appreciated the things I got for free and thought of them as normal, until I actually now have the opposite and would give literally anything to get, even if it was only a day of that time again. I miss our little family time every month when we got to watch a movie together, even though it was just kiddies' shows, so the kids could watch them with us. I miss our own movie night after the kids had gone to bed when I got to cuddle with Dan on our sofa and watch the movie. I miss those little dates that Dan would take me on to celebrate anything. I miss the gifts he would give me on random occasions. I miss all the promises made that will never now get fulfilled because of me. I miss everything, and I know it's all my fault, and there's really no getting back from this. Now all I do is stick to roaming the internet with a fake account just to see whether someone has posted new information about them. Something, anything that I could use to get even a tiny bit of information about them or even see their pictures, how they look like now, whether they're happily enjoying their lives without me in it. But I've gotten none. No one had posted anything about them in months. Even Dan's account, which he was always updating with every cute moment in the kids' lives, had no new posts. It's so frustrating living like this, not knowing anything, and relying purely on your mind, which keeps playing dirty tricks on you all the time, by imagining a new female role model in their lives, and someone who would not have done any of the disgusting things I did to hurt my family. Someone who would love and cherish those little moments that make up everything for us as a family. Someone who would be there for my kids, advise them, teach them on what to do and not to do. Someone who would take care of Dan and never think of his looks and regard him as too old. Someone who will take up my role as their mother and as Dan's wife. Someone who is not me. I cry every day. I know that's not a piece of information you're interested in, but I cry every day, wishing I had a second chance, wishing that I didn't let that selfishness take over so much of my life and family. I wish I had not been so stupid as to think that once Dan found out, he would forgive me, as he had always done if I did something offensive to him when I shed a little tear. But I watched Dan that day at that dinner, and I realized that my affair had not only changed me, it changed him too, into that cold, unforgiving man that stared at me as he destroyed my life without even bothering about how I would feel. I know, I did that first, not bothering about his feelings and cheating on him, but it doesn't make it hurt any less than it does right now. I know most of you don't want to hear from me again. You all think of me as an evil person with no redemption whatsoever, and I agree. There's no saving someone like me because I was the one who ruined my life. But then again, there's really no one else to listen to me. All these guilt and emotional burden that I carry around just weighs me down so much, I go crazy each day. I know that you guys don't care about how I feel, but I thought writing it down will ease the guilt and regrets. But it never has. If anything, it has only added to it because all your comments on my post ever reminds me of is that it's all my fault. which is why this is going to be my last post here. Goodbye, guys.